What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. This is Momentous Living. My name is Kevin, and it's been a while since I made a video. I've been a little busy. I got married, had a little beautiful daughter with my wife, finishing up my career. I hope I'm not finishing up my career, finishing up my degree. Then I'm going to start something else because that's just, never stop learning. And in the middle of trying to open up a new health and wellness clinic. So all of that being said, today, the purpose of this video is to talk about the carnivore diet. Oh my goodness, the carnivore diet. I feel like just mentioning that, either people cringe or they have a lot to say. I'm going to try and be super concise. I want this not to be full of tangents or just me rambling on, because that seems to be something I tend to do. So we'll try and stay on topic. Long story short, a client of mine who had some issues trying to get to his goals, which is basically get healthier and lose weight. His brother got him on the carnivore diet. And I'm really simplifying his story because it was phenomenal, just fantastic. His blood work changed, his weight dropped, he felt overall healthy. All that to be said, it seeded the discussion, the thought of this carnivore diet. Now, in my degree, kinesiology and clinical exercise physiology, we touch on all these topics. Now, I'm far from a professional, but I'm also far from not being able to have discourse on these topics. I could understand the science behind things. And that being said, in school, we don't really talk about the benefits of this. We don't talk about the benefits of eating only animal meat, right? Only meat, chicken, fish, red meat, anything that comes from an animal that's basically carnivore diet, eggs, all that stuff. We're taught not to do this. But I also have to say I had a phenomenal teacher in this crazy nutrition course. It was like it was a physiology of nutrition. It was wild, really the physiology aspect of it. And I would always go to see her either on break or after class. And I would talk to her about like a hypothesis or maybe a certain question I had with like certain mechanisms, like if this, what about that? And she was amazing in how she would respond. But I remember one thing she said. She goes, when it comes to nutrition, one thing we know for sure is we'll never really get it right. It's always changing. There's so many different things to be thinking about. It's really a topic of like endless nuance. There's always something to address, someone who's wrong, someone who's right. It's a science that is constantly evolving. So my client, he went on this carnivore diet. It kind of seeded the thought into my head. And I just was like, wow, this is wild. This individual is getting such great results. And then I kind of just went on with my life. Now, in my life, to give a slight backstory, before I went back to school, I was in tremendous shape. I was running ultras. I was running half marathons and marathons very regularly. I was cycling all over the place, road bikes, I should say. I was working out all the time. I was in good shape. And then I went back to school and I was introduced to the topic of anxiety and panic attacks. And I bring that up because it's part of my story when it comes to the carnivore diet. Now, in this story that I'm going to tell everybody, this is not me promoting the carnivore diet. It may sound like that, but it's really me just talking about my anecdotal experience. And being a health professional in this field for 20 years, I'm quite shocked with my experience with this. So I'll talk a little bit about my backstory. So I said that I was in really good shape before school. School started. I had a tremendous amount of anxiety. I didn't know what that was from. In hindsight, I guess I was always kind of dealing with this type of stuff in my life. I just was not really recognizing it and not really dealing with it. And then I met my wife, and and I started to gain weight. I was in school. I was a lot more sedentary. The way my life was before, I was able to pretty much eat whatever I want because my calorie expenditure was wild. So now I'm in school. I'm in a great relationship. Me and my wife are enjoying our dates. We're going out, we're eating, we're in love. And all of a sudden, I find myself gaining weight. I find myself with a bunch of different issues, along with old issues, along with anxiety and panic. And I was eating whole foods, organic, everything. I was trying to get in my 10,000 steps a day. When I could, I'd work out, but the grades were important. So my working out definitely slacked. And then my client had his journey, his story, and I start to think about it. Now, along this journey, I also have to mention something else. I redeveloped my relationship with God. My faith became very important to me. And it came out of curiosity because me and my wife got married, and the way it is when you get married, you kind of sit down with the priest. We have a conversation about like what is marriage, what does it entail, and it was a little course. And when I left that, I just had this feeling like I felt like something was missing, and I had to put some work back into it. Now that's a topic for another time, for another video, but it is pertinent because all of a sudden, when I would go to church on Sundays with my wife, I started to feel as if I was short of breath. And this is a very common feeling when you have anxiety. So I was like, why am I feeling anxious? Because at this point in my relationship with anxiety, it was getting a little bit better. I wasn't as stressed all the time. My panic was not a daily thing, which it was for like a couple of years. And I was just trying to figure out what was going on. My route with anxiety and panic was always like a homeopathic type of route. I was always, I didn't go the medicine route. I was always trying to think of like, is there maybe an adaptogen I could take like ashwagandha or L-theanine, or maybe I should sleep a bit better, or light therapy, or I was always looking at other things that could help my overall stress levels. And that was my route. I'm not frowning against people who may need more of the medicine route with their health professionals. This was just my route, but it's also part of my carnivore journey. So I went to my doctor and I said, hey, listen, I don't mind if this is all stress and anxiety. It's all, I don't want to say in my head, but it's like a mental health thing. But what have we done to rule out other things? Because I feel short of breath in scenarios that I don't really understand. It just kind of hits me. And he goes, okay, no problem. We'll do a pulmonary test. We'll do a lung test in a simple way of putting it, just to see the overall lung capacity, what my lungs are able to do. And it will outline if there's any issues. So I get a call after my test, and the lady says, we're going to make an appointment with the specialist. It seems that you may have COPD, chronic obstruction pulmonary disease. This is typically a disease that usually we find in heavy smokers later on in life. That's not me. I'm not later on in life. I'm not a young guy, but I'm 40 years old. I don't feel that old, and I'm not a smoker. So I'm kind of I was taken back. I was like, what? COPD? Just when I start to get a hold of my stress, all of a sudden you throw that in there. I'm like, oh, come on. So I went to Google, because that's what any healthy person does, I guess. We just Google. And I started to, I want to learn. I want to learn what is COPD and how can I live with it? If this is something that I have, how can I live with it? What are certain things I could do that will allow me to still live a relatively normal life? And then I see some studies that it seems that whenever we go on a carbohydrate restrictive diet, so it could be like, we could even say Atkins or keto or the carnivore diet. These are all going to be diets that essentially force us to use ketones as a source of energy. So to make this kind of simple, whenever we eat a normal diet, we're going to be utilizing there's usually carbohydrates on the plate. So we'll see how Now we'll see, but we'll end up digesting these carbs. It goes into our body. We'll say glucose because that's what happens. The carbs come in, glucose. Now through certain mechanisms that gets stored as glycogen, and then we utilize these substrates as energy, along with other substrates, obviously, because we typically would have fat as well and protein. So the fat and carbohydrates are kind of the substrates that most of us on a normal diet will find our energy sources. With carnivore diet, we use ketones because we restrict those carbohydrates on a extreme level. So we end up utilizing ketones, and a ketone doesn't really matter what their names are, but we have like beta hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, I think, and acetone. So we have these three substrates, these three ketones that we're going to be utilizing for energy. And those would be instead of essentially using the glucose. Now we see in these studies that utilizing the glucose and the glycogen often leads to a type of inflammation. And when I was reading those, and unfortunately, I wish I could throw them up on the screen for people to go see those studies. I just read them. It wasn't something that I took note of, so I can't actually refer to them, and I wish I could. But there have been studies that were done that these ketogenic diets seem to be very beneficial for COPD. And then we also had like anecdotal proof for that, where individuals would talk about their experiences. But then I started to get down this rabbit hole where it's helping people with all sorts of disease, multiple sclerosis, women with fibroids, I don't know if I said Alzheimer's disease, depressions, anxieties. So I started to get super curious, and my client had just seeded this when I saw his results and spoke with him on the phone about it. And so now I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a try. So I started the carnivore diet right away. I went to go see the specialist about, my appointment was like a month later after the carnivore diet had started. And he just said, you have asthma. You don't have COPD. You just have asthma. I knew I had asthma. So I was like, are you sure? He's like, yeah. Don't worry about it. You're good. You just have asthma. And then he's like, well, we'll do another test in, let's say like 6 or 7 months. We'll just double check and we should be good to go. I'm like, all right, cool. But I continued on the carnivore diet. And all of a sudden, things happened in the carnivore diet. Crazy things happen. But at the beginning, it was brutal. It was brutal. The first 2 weeks were like, I felt like I had a flu. So they often refer to this as the keto flu. It was insane. My back hurt. I was sweating. I had no energy. I felt like, I don't want to say delirious, but it was like, this is crazy. This is insane. I can't believe, I felt like I was literally withdrawing from carbohydrates. It was a wild ride. And then in this journey, I started to realize when I lack fat and when I lack electrolytes, especially in the early phases, this destroyed me. So I made sure to have my electrolytes in, and I made sure to get, the fat sources in there. And I just stuck to it. And I told myself, I'm not gonna judge this until the 3-month mark. Meanwhile, this was really hard for me because I don't even really like meat. For 3 or 4 years, I was completely plant-based when I was running all those ultra marathons. And I thought that was supposed to be good. You hear all these podcasters and these influencers and all these people that are doing it. I'm like, oh, this seems the healthiest way and I want to perform. So I did that. And then when I met my wife, I started to become a little bit more just whole foods. I eat organic as much as possible and just tried to eat as healthy as possible. Gained weight, like I said, because I was basically a lot more sedentary than usual with a massive appetite. So now getting back onto the carnivore diet, all of a sudden I had these things that were changing. And I noticed that my arm was like, I guess you could say it was frozen, but I had this impingement or something that lasted for years. I went to physios, I went to osteos, I went to massage therapists. I did my own work, and there was a lot of things that actually working with the massage therapist and training a very specific manner. It seemed that I was getting it under control, but it was always kind of wonky. And I was never able to really do a good push-up because my shoulder, it just caused a lot of pain. And then all of a sudden, one day I kind of tested it. I was like, what's going on here? It feels different. And I went to go do some push-ups. And the reason why I went to go do some push-ups, because I was in the middle of carnivore. I was training like once or twice a week. But I was going to go to Italy with my wife for my birthday, and as well for her like baby moon or whatever you call that. And I was like, what can I do to stay in shape? So I wanted to try some push-ups, and the push-ups were like completely painless. I'm like, this is crazy. And I'm not saying it's because of the carnivore. I'm just saying something's happening here. And then before carnivore, I had a lot of like eczema, or maybe psoriasis, these little patches on my elbow that were like actually massive when I was plant-based, on my elbow and over my left eye. And then even when I went a whole foods diet, it was still there. Not as bad, but it was still there. And then on the carnivore diet, it went away, like completely. Even in the winter, because I live in Montreal, Canada. For anyone who knows, they know the winters are interesting. So even during the winter, it was gone. It was gone. And I was like, whoa, this is interesting. So I'm starting to see a lot of benefit. Now, early on, I mentioned in this video my faith, because the whole thing, this all comes into play. I couldn't breathe. I went to see the doctor. My client already talked about the carnivore diet. That seed was in my brain. And I hear about COPD and keto. And all of these things are starting to come together. And I start to realize that there's this benefit that's happening. And when I talk about this story, I never just talk about the carnivore. When I talk about my anxiety, my panic, I always have to give the grace to God. I mean, my prayer life, my faith, building on that and combining that with the carnivore diet, to me, that was like the secret ingredient. That was what gave me the ability to say, I used to have panic attacks daily for a year. I used to have anxiety. I talk about used to. Before I'd say like, no, it's been good for a while, knock on wood or whatever. Now it's like, no, that's a thing of the past. Do I still get stressed? Obviously. Can I still get anxious? Absolutely. But I stopped ruminating. I stopped ruminating on things. I've always had ADHD, and it's like that kind of went away. I'm still hyper. I have a lot of energy, high energy. But everything became something I can control. There was a lot of clarity. There was a lot of fatigue. There was a lot of fatigue. I mean, that's without a doubt. Sometimes I didn't get it right. I didn't eat enough. I didn't plan for the day or whichever. But all of a sudden, all these things are changing in my life. I obviously dropped weight. I dropped like 50 pounds at first, and then I regained a little bit because I wasn't working out a lot. So after a while, it looked, I wanted to work out. I mean, it's self-explanatory. Then I'll obviously show some before and afters, like talk about having a piece of humble pie. It's crazy. We don't realize we're getting heavy, and then all of a sudden, bang. But, not that long after, I think it was from April 18th, I think I started. And then the after picture I took that I'll show was, I believe, August. And then there's a picture of very recently, like 2 days ago. My experience with the carnivore diet is so interesting because one, I don't really like meat. Two, I had a lot of things that were getting better in my life. And three, I wasn't really like a believer going into it. It took me like 3 or 4 months to kind of go like, okay, I'm not killing myself, or at least I don't think I am. Now I'm going to leave it here because I don't want to keep on rambling. This video is all about just saying, it's a quick little intro to my experience after a year and 1 month on the carnivore diet. And I have to say, anecdotally, this has been a game changer for me. I think everyone has to do their own due diligence. They have to go study the topic. They have to, see what is it that is getting them to ponder this potential life shift, this quite a drastic change in their diet. For me, it seemed to make sense with all the things that had changed and the very balanced life I was able to live now, to be able to maintain. And like I said, my faith, this has been such a game changer in my life that I don't promote it, but I also do talk about it with my clients. So I'll leave you with this. Maybe it's time that when we eat our carbohydrates, we consider them in the same manner that we think about alcohol consumption. Maybe we should consume carbs with the same respect we give alcohol. Sometimes you want to enjoy yourself. You want to have a drink. Sure, no problem. But maybe it's not best to have one day in and day out, right? Morning and night type of thing. No judgment to people who are struggling out there. We all have our struggles. But if we restrict our alcohol and we restrict our carbohydrates, it seems like something really beautiful happens. And on a side note, I didn't mention this, it just came to me. The type of sleeps that I get on the carnivore diet are ridiculous. I didn't even think this was possible. The nighttime comes, I close my eyes, and then I wake up to an alarm in the morning. At 40 years old, I thought good sleep was just a thing of the past. Now I have a 7-month-old, and my wife is quite the rock star, so she really handles that quite well, and I'm so fortunate for my wife, Pam. But still, our daughter sleeps quite well through the night, and I sleep deep, and I am so very thankful for that. And maybe that is a cofactor in my anxiety, and it very well could be. And maybe my overall weight loss, cortisol, maybe there's a type of correlation. Maybe these all have a very tight correlation to how I've been feeling and my anecdotal benefits of going on a carnivore diet. But all I can say is it has been an amazing journey for me. And that's it for today. So as always, thank you. Thank you for taking time to take part in my little stories, my little journey. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.